Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board Treasurers webinar. My name is Mary Catherine Duffy. I'm the Professional Development Director here at SAES, and we're so honored to have our Interim Executive Director, Andrew Wooden, on the line. Hi, Andrew. And we've also got Rick Kellogg, who is our panelist today. He is the former treasurer of SAES. And quite honestly, an expert in the world of school finance. And so we're very honored to have him on as a panelist today. Welcome, Rick. Rick is in...
It's a joy.
Rick is in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, not Philadelphia, but in Pennsylvania, kind of out in the country in Pennsylvania. So we have a little bit of a lag. And so we're going to try to honor that and pay attention to that as we walk through this webinar today. But I want to start just and throw it to Andrew to say a little quick welcome to everyone.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. I'm Andrew Wooden, the interim director, and I'm at the SAES offices in Canyon, Texas with Pat Blevins, and we'll be working here for most of the week. I'm thrilled to listen in on this webinar. I will not be a participant, but I look forward to hearing Mary Catherine and Rick do their work. As a head of 25 years, I don't think anyone is more important to a school's health than a treasurer of a board. So have fun with this today. And Rick, thank you so much for leading. And I will go off video and mute myself. Thanks for including me, Mary Catherine.
Thanks, Andrew. We appreciate you being here. So I'm going to go ahead. Before I share my screen, I just want to say a couple of things about Rick, because truly, and I mean this when I say it, I don't think that I would be able to take credit for anything I know about school finance if it weren't for Rick. He says that's not true, but I've learned so much from him. And I'm just so glad to have him on the call, because there's going to be things that a lot of the content that you're going to see today is Rick's content, and he's going to be able to clarify for us. So let's talk a little bit about how you can engage in this webinar. The first thing I want to make you aware of is that this is a recorded webinar. And so you will have access to this recording. And so all the participants can watch it on demand again. We'll also be sending you the slide deck that you're seeing, so you don't need to take notes if you don't want to. Want to make sure that you know also that there's several ways that you can interact on this webinar. You can interact through the Q&A box. We'd love for you to take a look at the Q&A box and put your questions in there. You can interact through the chat. That's one of the things that I like about the chat is that people can comment, so that feel free to do that. And then finally, there are going to be a few poll questions that you get to answer. And so we're going to, throughout the webinar, we'll have some poll questions. So let's do a quick, I'm going to stop my share for just a second. Let's just do a quick practice on making sure that you have access to the Q&A box. So just jump in if you have the ability to, and put your name and where you are from in the Q&A box so that we can see that that's working. You can also do it in the chat so we can see that as well. I know we've got a few people that are calling in from their phone and can't access it. We've got okay, so St. James Episcopal School, Corpus Christi. We got Good Shepherd, Friendswood. We got Trinity, Baton Rouge. Great, thank you so much. We're so glad everybody's here. All right, let's go ahead and get started on our content. So best practices of the board treasurer. This is a webinar that is such an important webinar, because most schools don't have a board treasurer that stays on for a long time. And although I think that there are more and more schools who are doing it for a longer period of time, when you are a new board treasurer, you just got to have an understanding of what your basic role is. So the purpose of this webinar today is which is that we're going to talk about what your role is as a board treasurer. We're going to talk about some best operating practices for good financial management. And then we're going to talk about some keys that are for successful relationships with the board treasurer and the head of school. The relationship between the treasurer and the head of school is a crucial one. It's almost as crucial as the one between the head of school and the board chair. Rick, would you agree with that?
I'd say it's at least as important, because if there's nothing but downside if that relationship is poor.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And there's so much to be learned that it's very difficult to do that on your own. And so the board treasurer plays a really important role, I think, with a head. And what I want people to understand is that I come from this, as my experience was the head of school. I was the head of school for 17 years at St. Albans Episcopal Day School. Rick comes to us as a former board treasurer and entrepreneur, but he understands nonprofit finances, and especially in the area of schools. And so I think his experience is going to be really helpful for us today. So let's talk about, this is kind of, I love this picture, because to me, this is what a lot of people look like when you say, hey, we'd like you to be the board treasurer. And this is the look that people give. Would you agree with that, Rick?
Oh yeah, I didn't step to the back of the line fast enough.
That's right. So what is my job as the board treasurer? So I want to talk about 4 different areas that I think are really the primary role of the board treasurer. The first one is that you, for most schools, you are the chair of the finance committee. The assistance with the development of the budget is a pivotal role of the board treasurer. You do not do it yourself, but you certainly assist with it and have lots of input in it. The ensuring of regular review and reporting. That's something we're going to talk about a lot, because as you know, this is something that every board meeting we should be taking a look and reporting and reviewing our financials. And then finally, ensuring that the school operations are best practice, that the things that they're doing within the school are following best practice, and that you're doing the things that are going to move the ball towards the goal as far as being a successful school. So let's talk about the thoughts around chairing the finance committee. Number 1, you should make sure that there are regular finance committee meetings. I find this to be something that oftentimes schools are missing. They're not necessarily doing it on a regular basis. I think that the role of the treasurer is to make sure that the finance committee meetings are being held regularly. I would prefer monthly. The second is to serve as the chair of the finance committee. You work with the head to set the agenda for those meetings. You make sure that the things that need to be discussed are being discussed. And then finally, representing the board and ensuring that best practices of financial management are taking place at the school. Probably there are not going to be a lot of board members that are paying attention to that as much as you are. As a matter, I will say this, and then I want to ask Rick a couple of questions. Minutes, this is something that a lot of schools don't know. Minutes at the finance committee meetings should be taken and kept as a matter of record. This is a SAES standard. It's something that in the documents and adherence to standards, you're going to be asked. And a lot of times people don't realize that they should be taking minutes. They'll take minutes at the board meeting, but they won't take minutes at the finance committee. And so that's something that really does need to be taken place, and it's an SAES standard. So Rick, tell me a little bit about kind of, has your experience been that there are schools that don't have finance committees?
Very few anymore. There almost always is a finance committee as part of the board charter or bylaws. It's pretty common for the finance committee not to meet. Not to meet if at all. It's pretty common for finance committees to meet right before a board meeting.
Right.
And it needs to be a regular occurrence. Monthly is great. Quarterly at a minimum.
Right. I agree with that. And we did, in an effort to make it convenient for some of our board members, we did do that. We met right before the board meeting, but I can tell you that if it was going to be a long finance committee, or if it was going to be something that, budgetary or whatever, we did it at a different time so that we had plenty of time. So it shouldn't be one in which you are just running in there, making a decision and running out. that it needs to be thoughtful. This is a working committee. So I want to take a poll real quick and find out if in how many of the schools do have finance committees. So we just put up a poll question. Does your school have a board finance committee meeting that meets monthly? So we've got a few coming in. A few more seconds and we'll close the poll. All right, let's end it and let's see. I'll share the results. We've got about 60% of our participants say yes, they have a board finance committee that meets monthly, and we've got a couple that don't. So yeah, that's good. That's good to know. I have found, FYI, that there are schools that I have run into that have not only not had a finance committee in their bylaws, but don't have it. And so what that means is, for most of the time, is that the board treasurer is doing all the work. And that's not super helpful, because who should be on a finance committee, Rick?
Well, the board treasurer has to be on and should chair that committee for sure. It should be one or, well, actually probably two or three other trustees who are, they don't have to be financiers, they don't have to be CPAs, they don't have to be professional bookkeepers or anything like that. They have to be interested. They have to be comfortable with numbers. They don't have to be, a Wall Street analyst is not what you need, but you need somebody that can follow the conversation of numbers. We're going to budget this, and it's that percent of that something else, and it's going to achieve this and so board mandated goal. That you need interest more than you need professional qualifications.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that it's really important for there to be a variety of people, because the finance committee is a working committee, and it should be a committee where you're working out details. It should not, we're not working out the details of the budget in a board meeting. We're talking about it in a board meeting, but at the finance committee level, that's where you're hashing a lot out. So people on the finance committee need to be willing to ask questions. I love that you said that they need to be interested. And so it shouldn't be a committee where you just walk in and rubber stamp whatever's given. You should ask the question, why are we doing this? I remember I had there were a couple of years where I had a finance committee that just wasn't as engaged as I would like for them to have been. And then we had a guy who got on our board. He was an older man, really a wonderful, wonderful guy. He didn't have any kids at the school. He had never, but he had been an entrepreneur and owned his own business for years. And he started asking questions from day one. And it was so good for me. It was so good because there had been a few years, I had been at it for a while, and there'd been some years where no one asked questions. And so we just did kind of went through the motions, right? And he started asking questions, and I was like, I hadn't thought of that. And yeah, and it required me to be on my toes. And so I think it's important for you to be willing to ask questions.
Well, the other thing, just to chip in, if I may, is very few heads of school are trained accountants. In fact, I don't know one. I probably know more than 100 heads of school, but I don't know one of them who's a CPA or an MBA by training.
Right.
They're always warm, empathetic people, usually are fabulous teachers, but are often buffaloed by numbers. So if the treasurer can really help that person, who's the head of school, do his or her job in formulating budgets and riding herd over what really is a pretty complicated operation, even if it's not huge by business standards.
Right. And so you mentioned budget. So let's talk a little bit about budget development. So what does good budget planning look like? Well, we're going to talk a little bit on the next slide about a calendar, but your role as a treasurer is to assist the head of school with the creation and presentation of the annual budget, and the business manager or the business officer should be participating in that planning. So I liken it a little bit like this. When we would get started, I would go to my business officer and say, I want you to here's some parameters for enrollment projections, for salary projections. Put together a budget for me, and that's where we'll start. And so the business manager puts together, kind of does the nuts and bolts part of creating the beginning budget, and then brings it to the head of school. And then that's when, and they work a little bit on it, and then they bring in the treasurer. And that little 3-person committee does the bulk of the work around budget development. And that's before it even goes to the finance committee. So let's take a look at a sample calendar of when you might start. Now, this was a little surprising to me when I first started it as a head of school. You start school and it's August, and all of a sudden you're telling me in September, I need to start thinking about next year. Yes, you do. Because the reality is it takes a while to create budgets. And we're going to do a little shameless plug. There will be a webinar that we do in November that is a nuts and bolts webinar around budget, how to create a budget and how to create a financial dashboard. So stay tuned for that. We're going to kind of hit it at a high level today, but the sample calendar is this September, October is when you begin to review previous and current year budgets. You look at enrollment trends, you begin to kind of establish a conservative goal for the year. November is when you kind of create a preliminary budget and a recommendation to the board for tuition and compensation for the coming year. Now, some people do this later. I think it's good to try get it done get the tuition set in December so that in January and February, you can get your materials out, but that's kind of the way we did it. September and October is the time in which the business officer and the head of school and the treasurer are working together, and then creating that and then getting that to the finance committee. And then the finance committee is working on it after that. January, February, we continue to, December, we try to present a budget that has a tuition recommendation and compensation for the coming year. January, February, we continue to work on that budget and watch re-enrollment. March and April, we present and approve a preliminary budget. May through July, we continue to monitor and make budget amendments as necessary. And then August, we present and approve a final budget. So Rick, do you have any thoughts around this calendar? Anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, the reason it's such a drawn out process is that the easiest way to do a budget is to look at your last year's budget and just increase it by 3%, right?
Right.
That's the worst thing that a school can do. Please don't do that. It tends to perpetuate mistakes, and we all make mistakes, and it tends to perpetuate bad decision making. We all make bad decisions. If you do nothing but just increase your last year's budget by 3% instead of, or 2%, or whatever the CPI, Consumer Price Index, is doing, then you will have lost the opportunity to correct and adjust things that need to be corrected and adjusted. So that's one reason that this is iterative, or month by month by month. And then, of course, most schools don't know their final enrollment until the very last days of summer.
Right.
There are a few schools with big waiting lists, but those are rare. And since, roughly somewhere between 70 and 80% of a typical school's revenue is from tuition, that's the most important, the single biggest thing in a budget is the tuition typically. And you can't really cast a final budget until you know what that's going to be.
Yeah. And then you can't even do compensation until you know what your enrollment's going to be. So that's even more, that's a bigger piece of the puzzle as well. So let's talk about the second role of the treasurer, and that is third role. What does it mean to review and report? So reviewing monthly financials of the school and perusing for accounting and financial errors. That's a really important part of being a treasurer. I think that I think it's critical that the treasurer take a look with the business officer and the head of school at the financials before they go to the board. Because people make mistakes, and that's especially in smaller schools where there's maybe one business officer. It's really important for there to be some backup and for somebody to be able to take a look and go, hey, what does this mean? Or why is this over, or whatever? And then going to the board, the treasurer's job is to prepare and present treasurer reports at the monthly board meetings. That can be, I think, sometimes challenging for treasurers that don't necessarily want to talk very much at the board meeting or whatever. But truthfully, you should have looked at the board, the financials of the school, looked at them, made sure there are no mistakes, or make sure that you can understand them. And then you should present those at the board meetings and be prepared to answer questions about them. And then the final thing would be to ensure that there's an annual external auditor review, which we're going to talk about in a minute. One other thing that I would say to also is that I think it's really important. Oftentimes our business officers have, they have the detailed knowledge of the budget. They have the detailed knowledge of expenditures, and it's easy to, at a board meeting, just kind of let a business officer do that. And for me, that's not appropriate. It's the treasurer's job to make that a monthly board meeting report, and it's important for them to know that information going into the board meeting. What you don't want to ever do to a business officer or a head of school is not look at that, and then you go to the board and you're reporting it, and then you ask a question that you should know the answer to, because then it looks like nobody's communicating. Rick, do you have thoughts about that?
Well, you're right. What it looks like is that nobody's in charge.
Yeah.
And nobody's watching, nobody's minding the store. And that's certainly not the impression you want to leave a board of trustees.
Well, and I can say this as a head of school, there's not that looking like nobody's minding the store ends up on the head of school's shoulders. So if I have a board treasurer who's not working or not preparing or whatever, it's always going to end up looking like I'm not doing my job. So I think that's really important to remember. So financial review, one way that you can always know what's going on is that the head of school and the business manager should be reviewing the financials monthly. And then the treasurer should be doing that. So if that means that there's a monthly meeting or a monthly Zoom call where the three of you review those and ask questions and get all that straight before the board meeting, I think that's important. The finance committee should review the financials monthly at their finance meeting. So at our finance committee, we would meet typically right before the board meeting. We would review the financials, the treasurer would present them. We would discuss anything that needed to be discussed, because again, you don't want to get into a board meeting and have a member of the finance committee asking a question that they should know the answer to. That just feels like we're not prepared. So, and then finally, up-to-date financials should be presented every single month. So one way you can do this, we always presented the financials just in financial form, a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. I'm not going to tell you I think that's the right way to do it. I think it would be better if you have the ability to create some sort of monthly dashboard that makes more sense and is easily read by a layperson. I think that's smarter than presenting the financials. Rick, have you seen what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly. The balance sheet, really, if you do that quarterly or even twice a year, that's plenty. Income statement is, which is a check register basically, is something that needs to be looked at monthly. The treasurer sometimes has to drag, part of your job should be to drag the head of school by the ear into meeting at least once a month. Mm-hmm. Usually heads of school, not Mary Catherine, but some of my other friends who are heads of school hate doing it. Hate it. They would rather deal with the worst parent and the worst kid than having to sit through a financial discussion, but you have to make them do it. And by the way, there's no such thing as everything always meeting budget. I've never had that state of grace. I think it's like nirvana or something. It's unobtainable. There's always going to be something happens, and numbers are not tracking exactly according to what you thought they might. That's not the problem. The problem is not being able to explain it and not
Right.
being able to see it. That's what a board wants. They want you to be radar
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tell you when things, and to be able to explain why things are out of whack.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, as Rick alluded to, I am a business person. I have a degree in business and a master's degree in business. And I just, it was easy for me. But at the end of the day, I'm also not a super detailed person. And so I never got torqued up about whether we were a little bit over on something or whatever. But a lot of times my business manager would and so I think to Rick's point that we don't need to say, oh gosh, we have to have a perfect budget, but we certainly need to be able to explain any overages or anything that's out of whack. So let's switch gears here and let's look at the best practices. What are things that you should, as a treasurer, be sure that your school is doing in terms of best practices? I'm not going to go over and talk about all of these, but there are a few that I'm going to talk about. School incorporation is something that's a best practice. Some dioceses do not allow it, but we do encourage you to incorporate the school as a legal entity. Establishing clear lines of authority. This is particularly important in a parish day school, which we're going to touch on briefly. Separate accounting between the church and school if a parish day school. Ensuring competent accounting, making sure that the accounting that's being done in the business office is competent. Ensuring financial transparency. That kind of speaks to the idea of review. More best practices, high quality bookkeeping, following a calendar for the budget process, regular financial review, risk management plan, a shared use agreement. We talked a little bit about that in leadership and governance. A PRISM account, this is a provision for plant replacement, renewal, and special maintenance. Special funds that are controlled by the board, making sure that you don't have any parent associations or things that they're fundraising outside of the business office. And then I've added this on as one of them because I want to talk about it, and Rick alluded to it earlier, but ensuring that there are professional development funds that are available for a head of school if they need it. And so let's take a quick poll question here. And I want to know if the schools, if you're a parish day school, is your school's accounting separate from the church's accounting? So let's see if I can go to another poll. Here we go. School, if you're a parish day school, is your school's books separate from the church's books? The answer can be yes, no, or not sure. What we hope is 100% yes, but we've seen when it's not. All right, we're going to close it up in about 3 seconds. All right, good. Well, now we do. That's what we see is we have 100% of ours are yes, and that's good news because we want to see schools, parish day schools that have separate accounting. Why is this important? Because it's the SAS standards, first of all, require that the school board oversees the funds of the school. And remember that in parish day school governance, you have the vestry empowers the board, and the board is empowered to run the school. And that can't take place if those aren't separate. The best practice is that the vestry gives the school the power to steward those funds. And so that's why it's really important. Here's a question. In a small school, would it be okay if the books are separate, but maybe one person kind of manages both church and school finances? What do you think about that?
That's okay, so long as the books are separate and the money is separate.
Okay. Yeah,
You can share a bookkeeper, and very small schools will often do that.
Yeah, we do see that a lot of times in smaller schools. It's not, is it perfect? No. Would we like you to each have your own person? Yes. But at the end of the day, sometimes that's not possible. But the key is that the funds are separate. So high quality bookkeeping, what does that look like? How do we ensure that we're doing high quality bookkeeping? Well, these are simple and they seem like they are obvious, but I can tell you that when you are in a small school, sometimes this is hard. Cash is always registered as soon as it arrives. Physical assets are registered and kept up to date. Bank statements are reconciled. Two-party signatures are required on all large checks. Now, how large should that be? Well, that's really up to the board to decide what their policy will be on that. You know, that, I don't know, we usually did $500 or more, had to have two signatures. And we always did two signatures if given the opportunity, we always did two signatures, right? Do you have a thought about that, Rick?
It really depends on the size of the school. So it should be, how much would it really, if you were to lose $500, is that a big problem for the school? Well, then it should be a two-party check.
Yeah.
If you were to lose $50,000, in the case of a huge school, that would probably hurt, and you would need a two-party check. It depends on how big the budget is.
And that's up to the board to decide that. That's a part of the board policies for finances. Number 5, accounting files are backed up daily. This is, and we recommend actually that you back them up not only on site, but off site as well. Head of school approves all checks over a defined amount. Invoices and check stubs are kept together. Records are watched for fake vendors. This is, again, just simple stuff, but sometimes when we have small schools and we have small business offices, people don't know. And so we want to make sure that you're aware of it. So let's do another poll. Jump in while we do this poll question.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead and answer while I pull it up.
Oh, no, these things are they all should look like common sense, right? I mean, they're all kind of sensible recommendations. And the reason that we make them as recommendations is that we've seen cases, not a few cases, of schools who don't do it.
Yes.
And they get into trouble without fail. They get into trouble. I mean, these are good-hearted, well-meaning people, but by failing to follow the kind of common sense steps, you easily get into trouble, because a school actually is, although it does not have a huge cash flow, it has thousands of transactions. It's and business people tend to underestimate how difficult running a school is, because they say, well, the budget's only $1 million, it's only 500,000, it's only 5 million, whatever it is. It's not big compared to a business, but it's so many small transactions going on that have the opportunity of getting out of control.
Right. Things like T-shirt sales. We're selling T-shirts for $5, or we're having a bake sale, or Rick's right. The amount of transactions that come through the business office, it's unbelievable. And that's why it's important to keep all of those best practices in order, those kind of simple tools that keep your business office running efficiently. The other thing is that, and you bring up the idea around so many transactions, this is why it's important that we believe you should have an audit or review every single year. And it should be by an independent auditor. So I want to do another poll, and I want to know, does your school engage in an independent audit or review yearly? Okay, we're going to give you about 5 more seconds. All right, let's share the results. We've got about 80% say yes, and we've got about 20% say not sure. So let's talk about that for just a second. Why would we have an audit or review? Well, first of all, and I love this, because this slide is actually just Rick's words put into a slide, but they all make so much sense, because number one, as we've talked about, bookkeeping is complicated and innocent mistakes are made. And the reality is that unless you've been in the school business office, you have no idea how many things come in, $5 t-shirts and donations for this and sales for that and book fair and all of these things. And it's a lot. And having an independent audit or review helps to make sure that we're not missing something. Audits offer an invaluable planning tool. They give you an outside kind of set of eyes to take a look at and go, what are we seeing every single year that seems to be an issue, and how do we plan for the future to fix that? SAES won't accredit without it. Our SAES standard is that the Board of Trustees will engage in an independent certified public accounting firm to perform an audit with an accompanying management letter. A school with an annual revenue of less than $1 million can alternate between audit and review. But if you have a school where your budget is $1 million or more, you have to have an audit, and that's an accreditation standard. It's crucial protection for the head of school, the board, and the vestry. And mistakes cost money. And a lot of times people think, well, gosh, why do we have to spend all that money on an audit or review? But the reality is that if you're not doing it and you don't see the mistake until it's just right in your face, it's going to cost you more than a review would cost. Rick, thoughts on that? I know you feel pretty strongly about audits.
Well, I do. And it's, boards never fire themselves.
Right.
They always fire the head of school. So for the head of school in particular, it's absolutely crucial protection. And then, as you know, Mary Catherine, as you say, it's right. It's if somebody is either made a mistake or is bent on fraud, and we don't see that very often at SAES, but we have seen it. An audit catches it, a review catches it. It may not catch it as soon as you'd like, but it will catch it before it gets to be horrible. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, you just simply can't run a school without it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do. All right. So the last kind of role of the treasurer, in my opinion, is just learning to have a successful relationship with the head of school. And as Rick said, oftentimes we see most of our school heads are educators. They come into that role, even if they're administrators and have, a background or education in administration, they're still not necessarily business people or money people. And I will tell you that the year I had 18 hours of accounting in my education, and I still had questions for my treasurer about why are we doing this? Because nonprofit accounting is very different from the other kind of accounting. And you just have to understand and learn it. And the treasurer's job with the head of school is not only to be supportive, but to help them learn that. So let's take a look at that. Well, three ways you can do that: communicating, collaborating, and supporting. Communicating, just for me, means meet monthly. As Rick said, that really wasn't an issue for me, but if it is an issue, we want to be sure that we're meeting monthly and we're having these conversations about what do we need to be talking about? Where are we seeing some problems? What have we lost kids? Do we have some expenses that we're going to see coming forward that are going to be a lot? Have those monthly meetings. Insist on transparency. Insist on talking about the hard things that need to be talked about, and then be clear with established roles. Here's the deal. The head of school's job is to be the CEO of the company and run the operations. It is the head of school's job to be heavily involved and be the instigator really in the development of the budget. It's not the head of school's job to do it all, but it's certainly not the treasurer's job to do it all either. And I think it's really important that we remember that. Collaborating, working together on the annual budget, working with the finance committee to make good decisions, creating a long-term financial plan and a financial dashboard. Those are things that you should be doing and insisting upon your head of school and your finance committee doing. And then finally, nurturing and supporting. This is something that Rick and I talked about prior to the start, but many people don't realize that if your head of school needs the training, you cannot be frustrated with them if you're not providing that training. So I think that heads need to either be, there needs to be professional development money available to give the head of school the training that they need, the coaching they need, or the treasurer needs to do that. A lot of times treasurers, maybe they're not every one of our treasurers is a CPA. So they may not even feel comfortable doing that. And so, but what they can do is they can advocate in the budget to make sure that if this is a part of what the head of school needs in terms of their own professional development, that they're offering that. Engagement in the treasurer's role is crucial. It can be harmful to the school if you don't take your role seriously. So Rick, I know you kind of touched on this, maybe even prior to our starting the recording, but I'd love for you to talk just for a minute about that kind of this idea of the treasurer's role and how if you don't take it seriously, it can be harmful to the school.
This is the most crucial position in the Board of Trustees. There may be some board chairs here who will disagree with me, but having been both, if the board treasurer is just in it for the ride, it doesn't work. It needs a time commitment. I'm sure everybody on this call understands that, but I'm fond of reiterating it nonetheless. It's if the money gets sideways, everything goes sideways, right?
Yes.
You can have a lovely head of school, you can have a fabulous chair, but if the money goes sideways, then almost everything else will follow down the drain. It's that important.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think, no shade to our wonderful board chairs, because that's a big job too. But this treasurer, it's something that I think sometimes we aren't spending enough time on. And so we do have a question, and I'm going to let Rick answer this. And then I have a thought about it, but we'll see if it's the same. Is it recommended to have a monthly meeting with the head of school in addition to the monthly finance meetings where the head of school is present?
Yes, it is, because the head of school can let his or her hair down in a private meeting the way it's almost impossible to do in a committee setting. And you can talk more freely, you can talk faster. And it's also a great way of establishing and growing their relationship.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The head of school,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The
And
head of
Rick,
school also can speak without embarrassment, which is important.
Yes. Yeah, and to that point, I think that everyone on this call should know too, that this idea of nurturing and supporting, it's really important from a trust standpoint that the head of school can trust the treasurer to talk about things, to talk about anything. There should be, it should be the kind of relationship that you can say, hey, I need help with this, without feeling that you're going to be judged or that people are going to think that you're not capable of your job. Because the truth is that we have some really phenomenal heads of schools that don't really know finances, and that does not make them bad at their job. It just makes them have a need for training in a certain area of their job. And if the treasurer is not meeting with them and developing that trust where they can say, hey, I don't really understand what that means, or can you tell me more about this? To try to do that in a finance committee only, and certainly not in a board meeting, it's just better if you have that trust and you can ask those questions without feeling bad about it. So I like that. I agree with that.
I always remind myself that I know nothing about getting a sixth grader to seventh grade. I know nothing about articulating arithmetic from the fourth grade to the fifth grade. That's what a head of school does.
Right.
I know nothing about that. So I have this little narrow slice of expertise that I can hopefully put at the head of school's disposal, and everything goes better.
Yeah, yeah. And I think is a little unfair is this idea that to that point, I know all of these things about how to be ahead of school. And there's this one area that, quite frankly, in being educated as an educator or educated even as an administrator, those were not, this wasn't even in my education. And yet that's the one area that we're fussing at me about not knowing. And so I think that's really important that we take as a treasurer or as a board, we take that seriously and we say to our heads, hey, we're going to give you whatever training you need to be the best at your job. And part of that's going to be financial training.
I'll leave with one small example of there is a big school that I was treasurer of, big budget, $60 million budget. Okay. And the head was so embarrassed because she knew nothing about finance. She couldn't read financial statements, and she thought that she was dumb because of course, she'd never been trained.
Right.
They had no frame of reference for them. Again, this is a big school, $60 million. And I said, look, I can teach you to read a financial statement in 45 minutes. So, it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. And she got it, 45 minutes. So that's anyway, my point being is that it's very common for heads of school not to have a financial background.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, I can't reiterate this enough, that collaboration and that relationship that you're building between the head of school and the board treasurer, the head of school and the board chair, all of that is just going to make everybody a better, it's just going to make it for a better team. So we really encourage that. So that's the content that we have. I want to offer up any questions. Anybody have additional questions or thoughts that they would like to present? Rick, last minute thoughts or anything you want to end with?
No, I think you've covered the high points really very well.
Well, this is something that I think that we want to continue to stress as we do these webinars. We do a lot of webinars around board treasurer and best practices of the business office and financial dashboards. We do a lot of teaching and content around this topic. And we do that because at the end of the day, if your financial house is not in order, you cannot achieve your mission. And we believe so wholeheartedly that we've got a lot of people that want to do a really great job of making a great school. They cannot miss this piece of the puzzle. And that's especially for boards. And that begins with the board treasurer. So we want to encourage all of our board treasurers out there that are watching this to feel free to email us at any time if we can answer any questions. If you need support, that's what SAES is here for. Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this.
Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Call me anytime. It's my pleasure.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you. If you're watching this on demand, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you and we're here for you. So just reach out to us at any time. And Andrew, good to see you.